Hi, my name is Jamie Bilsbach, and I'm Center Director for the Central Mountain Small Business Development Center. And it's my honor to have Jen Visitacion join us today. She's the founder of Moonstone Ventures and an incredible leadership consultant and coach, as well as an amazing MC. She's done a few of our conferences. And then she is also kindly a SBDC consultant. You're joining the Building Resilient Systems in Your Business. And boy, do I think this topic is timely, Jen. I'm looking forward to learning myself. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Jen. If you have questions, please go ahead and ask them or put them in chat if you're not quite comfortable asking with the session being recorded. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And hi, everybody. I'm Jen Visitacion. And as Jamie said, you showed up in the Building Resilient Systems in Your Business workshop today. And I'm really excited to be here and to have this conversation with all of you. As Jamie mentioned, this can be as interactive as you want it to be. I recognize that sometimes you sign up for webinars like this so that you can listen in while you're doing other things or eating lunch, so no pressure. And if you are willing to share a little bit about, who you are and why you're here, that would also be helpful so that we can make sure that we kind of gear this presentation to best suit your needs today. Obviously, every one of you on this call has a different type of business, so we're not going to get too prescriptive. We're going to talk a little bit more kind of at that high level about resilience and ways that you might be able to think about resilience in your unique business. So with that being said, before I move on, I'd love to hear either in the chat or if you would join in for a second on your video or just on your audio. And let's do just a quick introduction and who you are and why you decided to come here today. And if, I'll go ahead and call your name so that it's easy. And if you don't feel like answering, no problem. So we'll start with Oliver, because you're the first on my list. Oliver, are you in a place where you could introduce yourself or say why you want to be here today?
Hi, so my name is Callie and I am with Oliver Grinling Corporation, and we are here today because we are always looking to strengthen our business and all of its systems and just be the best we can be. So we're always open to new information and seeing what everybody else is doing and how they're getting by.
Awesome. Thanks, Callie. And sorry about that. Calling you Oliver there. Appreciate you sharing a little bit about who you are and why you're here today. I'm nervous to say other names at this point, but is it Glorielli? Looks like you put something in the chat. Senior HR generalist working for a biotech company, new to the company and want to put your best foot forward and support the team. Awesome. SK, are you? Oh, got you in the chat too. Stacy, you're the business owner for Ask Oracle, and we're building websites and apps for helping people manage different information. Awesome. Oh, thanks. Glad I pronounced your name right. Jackie, you're a small home remodeling business and want to be sure you can survive the current economy and last for years to come. Awesome. Okay, I think, is that everybody, Jamie? I can't.
It is. Right now it is. Wonderful.
So that's great. And again, feel free to jump in chat. So today, I want to give you just a quick overview of what we're planning on talking about, and certainly chime in if you have any questions. But I want to do a little bit of background on understanding resilience and kind of how it's talked about, planning for resilience, some results modeling, and then a deepening practice. So I think we'll go ahead and dive in. So a little bit about my background. I am a business and leadership coach. I have an MBA focused on organizational and environmental sustainability. I am a consultant for the Central Mountain SBDC, and I run a coaching and consulting business, but I also run a farm and retreat center. And so I have some very different types of businesses that are all interconnected that that I have to look at resilience through different lenses. And so I think that gives me an interesting perspective to be able to look at resilience. So you'll see that as we walk through this presentation that I'm a big fan of metaphor. I feel like metaphor, especially in nature, really helps us to get grounded in the topics that we're trying to talk about. And I think that gardening is a great metaphor for resilience. So you're going to see quite a bit of gardening and farm development throughout this presentation. So if we're talking about what is resilience, what's the essence of resilience, I just love this picture, and I love this message here. Like tiny seeds with potent power to push through tough ground and become mighty trees, we hold innate reserves of unimaginable strength. We are resilient. So that is obviously talking about ourselves and resilience, but I think that is a really important thing, no matter where you are in the business, whether you're the owner or you're an executive or a manager or somebody that's working strategically in a department. It's your personal resilience is a really big part of the resilience of the organization that you're working with. And so it's very important that all of these strategies that we're talking about, that you apply them to yourself, so that you're building resilience in your own pathway in the work that you're doing, as well as trying to translate this to systems in your business. So if we're just to look at kind of the plain definition of resilience, it's an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. And so Jamie, as we started off this call today, you said, oh, I'm really looking forward to this because it seems very timely right now. And I would say right now and always, right? Because the one thing that we know is that change is never ending. And so, and we hate to say that misfortune is never ending, but we do know in business and in life that it's a series of both wonderful experiences and also really challenging experiences, and that's no different in business. And so when we think about resilience, we're trying to build some structures and systems around the ability to recover or adjust easily. And I think keeping that in mind is a really helpful, simple way to think about it. If you want to go a lot deeper, there are whole worlds of resilience and people studying resilience and really thinking about, there's the principles of resilience thinking, and the research that's been done has generated these 7 principles. And so I'll just kind of dig through them and give some examples right now. Jamie, do we have any questions in the chat or anything coming up before I move on?
Not yet.
Okay, great. So the Stockholm Resilience Center, that's done a ton of work on resilience thinking, says this first principle is maintaining diversity and redundancy. And so the idea here is that, if you're looking potentially at funding, diversity in funding is a really important thing to consider. Also, redundancy being, a lot of times we think, oh, well, we can't have too many cooks in that kitchen, but a little bit of redundancy in being able to have systems in place is important. Managing connectivity, managing slow variables and feedbacks, fostering complex adaptive systems thinking, encouraging learning, broadening participation, and promoting polycentric governance, meaning that it's not necessarily hierarchical, but it's more centered in multiple, more of a horizontal hierarchy in terms of governance. And so this is obviously a lot more academic, and we could go deep into each of these pieces, but I wanted to give you this as a framework for thinking about how some of these different principles may be playing into your personal or organizational resilience. And then here's another way that resilience is out there in the world, and this was from a Harvard Business Review, and this talking about how to boost your own resilience at work. And so common ways are exercising mindfulness, compartmentalizing your cognitive load, meaning all of the things that you're thinking about, being able to really focus and compartmentalize those things. Taking detachment breaks and developing mental agility and cultivating compassion. So as you can see, there are so many ways that people are talking about resilience. And I put these all at the beginning because I want you and us today to define our own ways that we're thinking about resilience, because there are, it's not going to be resilient if you don't feel resilient. Right. So this is just good frameworks to think about, but we're going to dig in and kind of create your own models for what resilience is. So I'll pause there and just say, I know that was kind of a lot of information to start off with, but are there any questions or things that have perked your interest that you want to jump in and ask before we move on to planning for resilience?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay.
I guess I do question that because of COVID and it continues, our world really has changed, and it's changing, like you said, every day. Do you feel like these breaks kind of and refocusing is a critical way to get through that each day, or is you just giving the outlines and now we'll dive in deeper?
Can you say more? Are you talking about the detachment break in that mindset, or which breaks are you talking about?
Yeah, the mindfulness as well as the detachment, and then compartmentalizing. I do that a lot just so that I can try to take one task at a time, especially when things get insane.
Yeah, well, I think it's different for different people for sure. And with COVID, how that's changed systems is also different in every business. So with businesses that have now moved to more remote and they're going to continue to have that, resilience may look more challenging in terms of connectivity, in being able to keep your team connected and feel like you're moving forward with shared vision. But that personal resilience, in terms of, say you're working remotely and you're having to work, now your computer is with you everywhere, and it's harder to shift from life to work and back to life. Those detachment breaks are going to be really important, to be able to make sure that you're able to continue to build that functionality in your day. But yes, we are going to dig deeper into that. Does that answer your question, Jamie?
It did. Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions popping up?
We do not have any other questions.
Okay. So planning for resilience. So if we're thinking about this as the ability to adapt to change, or to be able to bounce back if something, if there's a misfortune or something challenging happens, then I like to think about this in 3 different steps for planning for resilience. There's the scenario planning, taking inventory of current systems and strategies, and then identifying the gaps and needs and strategies to move forward. So in scenario planning, if you've taken any of my visioning courses, you know that I am a big proponent of focusing on what you want to have happen, not on focusing what you don't want to have happen. However, with resilience, we have to sort of lean into some of those worst case scenarios to be able to look at what we're feeling would be our biggest vulnerability. So I do think that in scenario planning, you want to start with what is your best case scenario. And that is making sure that in your business or in your role in your business, you have identified how you want this to work, what you want it to look like, and what your desired state is. And if you haven't done that work for yourself as to why you're doing what you're doing, that's a really, really important first step in resilience planning, so that you are focused on that desired state and that bigger vision that you're moving towards. That way you're not accidentally moving towards the wrong vision in doing this work. For example, if you are going down a river in a raft, you want to be looking at the space between the rocks to paddle, not the rock as you're paddling. So we want to make sure that you're looking at your best case scenario, that you're making it through those 2 rocks in your raft. But we're also going to think about that worst case scenario of what if you do get hung up on a rock, right? So back to that step 1, what is your best case scenario? And take some time to really think about your desired state. Then we want to look at all your possible worst case scenarios. And if you're wondering what these are, I can guarantee you it's the things that your mind is going to all the time. We are sort of programmed to think about where we're not safe or what is not working well. And so I highly suggest that you track all of these different thoughts that are coming up in terms of worst case scenario. So so I'll use the example of the garden. I have a 1/2 acre garden. I grow produce. The best case scenario is everything I plant actually turns into the plant that I'm hoping it will, and then I'm able to harvest it and take it to market, and people are able to use the food. The best case scenario is that the weeds are completely managed and it looks beautiful, and every time you walk into the garden you feel like you've entered paradise. All of those things are my desired state and my best case scenario. The worst case scenario is we have a weather situation that happens, or a weather pattern that continually happens, and that affects the ability for my plants to grow. Another worst case scenario is a deer can get into the garden and eat everything right before it's ready to harvest. Another worst case scenario is that the weeds take over and choke out all of my plants. So you can see how in my mind, I know what I'm trying to aim towards, and I'm hoping the garden scenario is helpful for you, because it's a simple, easy way to catch this framework. So you can see that there are worst case scenarios that pop up in my mind. So now I can take inventory of what is in my control and what is not in my control with these scenarios. And so I highly recommend actually just taking some time in with a piece of paper to map this out and say, you know, in these different worst case scenarios, what is in my control and what is not in my control. And certainly we cannot control weather. That would be one area that's not in my control. But what I can do is decide placement of certain plants or how I might design my markets around a different type of, I may choose hardier plants than that can handle different types of weather. I may choose to do some protection over my garden rows. So there are some things in my control when it's related to weather, but there are lots of things that are out of my control. And so that's important to really distinguish, because as you can see, we're sort of separating some different thoughts out of this worst case scenario that we can really tackle and look at. So any questions coming up or ideas that are popping up as you're listening to this about best and worst case scenarios?
I'm not seeing any in the chat. Please add them if you have questions. But I guess my question is, when you're doing scenario planning, I think of in my job, there's so many different facets of my job. So there's the workshops, there's consulting, there's navigating grants. Do you recommend doing this kind of process in the different situations that each job holds? I guess with startup businesses, it would be starting the business, working in the business, but then there's also all the funding, and you know, there's just different buckets, I guess. How do you suggest using this in, or is it just the big picture?
I'm so glad you asked that question. And it's both, right? So right now we're kind of focused on that big desired best case scenario, and then that big, like, what's the worst case scenario? But yes, in each of those components, and we're actually going to dig into that a little bit more so that we can help kind of tease that out. In each of the, what you just described is various programs and different aspects of the work that you do. And so I think absolutely it would be helpful for you to be able to say, okay, with online workshops, what's the worst case scenario? Nobody can hear us, right? Worst case scenario, the recording doesn't work. Worst case scenario, you know, and it can be that all the things that cause you a little bit of anxiety, or anybody a little bit of anxiety about leading things, you can go ahead and track that and say, this feels like the worst case scenario. And then think about, well, what can I control ahead of time that I might be able to relieve some of that pressure and be able to adapt if it happens? And then what's out of my control, and how do I then bounce back when that doesn't happen the way that it needs to happen, right? And so, yeah, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. Anything else coming up?
No, but we had someone new join us. So Debbie, if you have questions, you can either ask them or put them in chat. And we want to make sure that we address all your inquiries.
Great, thank you. Yep, so once you've done your current, once you've done sort of that mapping of your best case scenario and your worst case scenarios and what you can control and what you can't control, then it's really important to take inventory of what you're already doing well, what's already working well. Where are you already feeling like you have some systems and strategies in place that will support you if things go sideways? And so the reason I really encourage you to do this part of the exercise is because, again, we're trying to remind our brains that we are safe. It's our survival part of our brain that thinks, oh, the worst thing is going to actually happen. So we want to keep going back and forth to building evidence for where you are already really resilient, both personally and in your business. So what is working well? So I can give the example of the garden again. What works well is I have a 6-foot fence with an 8-foot extension that works really well to keep out the deer, and I just have to make sure it gets closed. I have to make sure the gate gets closed. What else is working really well is the watering system that I have. What else is working well? The seeds that and the varieties that I plant tend to grow well in our climate. And so I can take that inventory of the farm aspect of my business and say, this is all working really well. So I would love for you all to share in the chat or out loud if you feel like sharing out loud, what is working really well in terms of resilience? Just one or two things that you feel really good about your ability to adapt or respond to a challenge. And we'll give you guys just a minute to go ahead and type in. And if you choose not to, that's fine. I just really encourage you to do this on your own. So are you seeing anything, Jamie?
I'm not.
Yep.
Oh, I do. We just got one. We have worked lined up for at least a year, assuming no one changes their mind. That is a really good thing.
Awesome. Congratulations, Jackie.
Always having a flexible schedule, Callie says.
Great.
I guess for me, I would say our programming's been working really well.
Yeah, and Jamie, you've really represented that kind of diversity in programming is building resilience of the center, because you're able to, reach different people with different needs. And so that is a strength for sure. Anyone else want to share? Okay, then we'll go ahead and move on. So where do you feel most vulnerable would be the next thing. And I did go ahead and tease this out into kind of 3 different components of your business. Where do you feel most vulnerable is as you're thinking about that worst case scenario. What do you picture happening in your financial systems? Where in your financial systems do you feel vulnerable? There was Jackie's example of having work lined out for the next year. So that wouldn't be a vulnerability, although she did mention unless they change their mind. So that would feel like a vulnerable place if suddenly a customer was going to change their mind. Then that wouldn't feel as resilient. So I hope, Jackie, that you're okay with me using that example, but that was a great example of, okay, there's a little bit of vulnerability there, even in that strategy. Human systems, is there a vulnerability in, do we have enough people in the roles that we need them in? Are we able to get staff right now? Is it the right staff in place to be able to accomplish the goals that we have? Is there going to be a leadership transition at some point, and is succession planning important? There are so many different things in the human systems that may pop in to feel vulnerable. And so this is asking you to kind of go deep and say where are you actually really worried, and take inventory. I'm not encouraging worry, I'm just encouraging that kind of objective inventory of where it feels most vulnerable and where the gaps are. And maybe it's in your physical or infrastructure systems. Maybe it's that you're most vulnerable because equipment is getting old, and or the office that you've been in is going to be rented to somebody else. Those types of things are important to be thinking about too. So once you've taken inventory of where you feel most vulnerable in the business and what the gaps are,
And
then
I've got, Kelly said finding knowledgeable staff has been a constant struggle for us. And I know for me, I just had a job opening. We helped my colleague start her own business. And that there, I have to agree with Callie that finding someone, there's the job market is very difficult right now, and the right someone that's passionate. And then we have, yes, we are struggling to find skilled and accountable carpenters right now. So I think human scale is a common thread in this group.
yeah, and I think that's what we are really hearing in trends across the board, coming off of COVID and with this economic challenge, is that the human systems piece is really in crisis right now, collectively, and that crisis looks like cost of living, and also what people are needing, and then what kinds of lifestyles people are willing to have coming out of the COVID epidemic. So that's it's no surprise that we're hearing more about the human systems piece. And my next workshop next month, next week with a different center, is working with people because people are complex, right? And so, but yeah, so I'll actually start at the bottom here with the human systems piece. So I want to encourage you, and you'll see that I said what tiny actions or strategies will help you strengthen these systems. What often feels very overwhelming about planning is that we come up with these big goals or big objectives or big strategies that we need to accomplish. And I think building resilience is really about the tiny actions that add up over time. And so imagine if you were spending 5 minutes a day building more resilience in one of these systems, by the end of the year, that's a pretty good cumulative amount of time building the systems. Whereas if you never get to it because it's too overwhelming, because you've made the task too big, then you're going to be right where, you'll be continuing to keep going the way that you are. So I really want to encourage those tiny actions and strategies. And so with human systems, that could look at like succession planning, thinking about, who you might, if you know that you're going to have somebody leaving in one of your roles, the ways that you can help plan for that succession, learning from that past position. Jamie, you have the opportunity to learn what worked and what didn't work from the past position, and be able to cultivate a new plan for the next person, strengthening onboarding and training, and maybe addressing any inequities that come up. And so the onboarding and training, when we can't find the skilled workers that we're needing, then sometimes we have to actually build that training into our own programs to actually be able to cultivate what we're looking for. And that is that can be a huge investment, but it's an investment that can really pay off, to be able to train someone the way that you want to. So those are, I know that doesn't sound like tiny actions, but I would say that there are tiny actions as part of all of those things to be able to really build that resilience in those human systems. Financial systems, that could be as simple as actually looking at your profit and loss. You'd be surprised how many people don't even want to look at their finances because they are afraid of what they're going to see. But the ability to actually lean in and look at what's working and what's not working in the business, or where are we investing and where are we seeing growth, really leaning into what the actual truth is, can help you build those tiny systems to change, like potentially getting creative on new revenue sources, or ways to build a shared vision with your team that talks about where you want to have investments going. And when I say investments, I mean expenses. When you have a shared vision with your team, where do you want money being invested to help grow that vision, and where do you what can that look like for you? And then physical and infrastructure, maybe it's enhancing your security on your computer, maybe it's maintaining equipment, maybe it's having a part of your routine that touches these things daily, monthly, weekly, annually, that you have a plan for that maintenance that needs to happen. So anything coming up, any ideas coming up that that might help you strengthen these systems?
I will say that onboarding and training, I think the change or the shift that's happened with staff and team members is that it's not a one and done. You don't do onboarding and go, whoo, I did that for the day. And it's like any relationship, that ongoing daily maintenance. And when you drop the ball, which I have had done myself in the past, things go badly. So that the thought of that, it's like you said, look at it at 5 minutes a day. I think it's also doing something each day.
Yeah, and you bring up such a good point that it's when we can systematize routines that touch on these things, it can be really beneficial. And because oftentimes, we'll put like, okay, training is a task list, but if training is actually like part of the weekly routine of working with the team, that there's some aspect of, maybe in your staff meeting there's a training aspect, or maybe in your staff meeting there's a security aspect for everyone's technology. The more we can systematize the things that will strengthen these systems, the better. And that was sort of redundant in saying systematize strengthening the systems, but building those daily routines, building those kind of processes helps to minimize that vulnerability. Anything else coming up?
Not so far, but if you think of something as we're going on, just put it in the chat.
Yeah, so just kind of coming back to that, it's really kind of coming back to that concept of there are things that are out of our control, and then there are things that are in our control in terms of building resilience in our businesses. And in the categories of what is in our control, our results are based on the actions that we take. And so whether they're tiny actions or they're big actions, it's really important to be tracking what those actions are and being intentional about those actions towards the result that you're looking for. So I wanted to offer this results model to think about it kind of can circle back to that best case scenario, but what would a result of resilience look like in your business? So really thinking about what resilience looks like to you. When you picture, I want to have a more resilient business, is that looking at how you're feeling in the business? Is that looking at the business's ability to adapt to leadership change or staff changes. For you and your business, what would the result of having resilience actually look like? And then from that, you can go back to what actions would you need to take or practices to get those results. So what actions or practices would you need to bring forth to be able to get those results? And then what's interesting is that we take actions based on how we're feeling about something. So asking the question of how would you have to feel to take that action, and what are you willing to feel? So we'll walk through an example in a minute. And then the fourth thing is, how would you need to think in order to generate those feelings that would help you take action? So an example, I'll use the garden again. Resilience in the garden looks to me like the plants are able to, a big majority of the plants, like 80% of the plants that I envision, are able to weather whatever storm happens through the season. So what actions would I need to take or practices to get those results? Well, I would need to be clear on weather patterns. I would need to check the weather so that I could make any adjustments to my structure if I needed to. I could daily maintain the equipment that I use to manage the garden. I could daily do 5 minutes of weeding. So there are some actions and practices that would help me to get that result. How would I have to feel to take that action? And what am I willing to feel? Well, I'd have to feel like those actions are actually moving towards those results. So I would have to believe in the process. I would have to trust that this work that I'm doing is going to bring that result. And I'm willing to feel challenged in doing that. I'm willing to feel like those daily practices might be more important than some of the other things that seem important. And I'm willing to look at those priorities. So how would I have to think in order to generate those feelings? I'd have to think that resilience is possible, and that that's just an example. I have to think that the garden growing and being resilient is possible, and that that we will be able to adapt throughout the season. So that's a really simple example, but I hope that you can find a way to apply that to your current scenario. Anything coming up for you, Jamie?
Lots of things are coming up. I actually have been challenged as of late. And so I wake up in the middle of the night with all those fearful worries. So I think changing my mind to what are the things that will allow me to be more resilient in this whole process. I've been taking notes like crazy, even though we're going to share this deck. So I think that's coming up, just the reality of I've probably been living in more fear and not looking at it as how can I solve some of these challenges.
Right. And really it's kind of that like trust that things will adapt, right? Because again, going back to there are things that we can control and we can't control. Those we've sort of taken inventory of that in this process already. And so we're only taking action on the things that we can control, but having that clear mental picture of what does resilience actually look like for me in my business hey, that's time well spent, I promise, for anybody. It's really time well spent. Any other questions coming up from anyone on the chat? Or up?
I'm not seeing anything, but I will mention here, if things pop up after this session, we are able to connect you directly with Jen through consulting if you're more comfortable working with her on one-on-one. So that's all I've got, Jen.
Okay. So just to offer some more deepening practices as you move through this work, notice, track your own thoughts and intentions, because you want to make sure that you're moving towards what the results are that you're looking for. So notice when you can actually change to an intentional thought, how it changes to a new result. So this is on a small scale, but also on a large scale. So practice that at a small scale. Look to nature as a metaphor for your own business. Where in nature do you see examples of resilience, and how are you or your operation similar or different? And tell your story of resilience. Again, look for evidence of how you have survived, thrived, and continued to learn and grow, and celebrate that journey. Because the more that we see that we have been able to be resilient, the more we're building that muscle towards creating resilience in the future. So again, this can be used and applied to you as your own self in your leadership, but also as your business and your systems. So that's all I had today. Here is my website if you want to reach me directly. And again, as Jamie said, you can also work through the Central Mountain SBDC to work with me. Or feel free to reach out if you have questions. Or if there's something you wanted more clarification from, you will get a copy of all of these slides. And it was my pleasure to be with you all today. So thanks for listening. And it's opened up for questions if anybody has any. And I'll turn it back to you, Jamie.
Yeah, and Jen, I will just say thank you. And also do a little stand on my soapbox to say Jen has helped me and my center immensely, particularly getting our team together and trying to figure out how to move forward, and what each team member was looking for to feel successful and to feel like we were doing good work. So I do think, Jen, your processes are just incredible and inspiring. So thank you. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat as well. And I just want to end with, we are the Colorado SBDC network. We actually have 15 centers in the state. We are the 15th and cover Chaffee, Lake, and Park counties, whom we're hosted by, and we're funded through the Small Business Administration, supported through America's SBDC, and then managed and funded through the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. And what we do is we help small businesses grow and prosper, and that includes their team members. We offer no-cost confidential consulting, free and low-cost training, and we also can connect you with access to capital through tools and resources and introductions. Next slide. And that's all 15 centers. You can see where your center is if you're not from our region. And reach out, because besides these workshops, like I mentioned, we offer that one-on-one consulting that can kind of help you through those steps. And I believe that's the last slide. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.